Yes, good afternoon. I'm Angelos Mokloulis. As you know, I'm management consultant to the Athens International College, ICBS, and I would like to thank you all for your participation. But mainly, I would like to thank EASE for adapting, hosting, and supporting this event. This event, which could easily be a horror show if we think about the terror that cybercrime already creates and the disasters that cybercrime creates around us. But our aim is totally the opposite. We aim to offer information and knowledge because we think that this is something very important. It is like an investment on our protection and defense and the resilience, personal and corporate. This is the reason that we decided ICBS and Mars, global leader, as we know, on risk assessment and evaluation, to organize this event. And we hope that it will be interesting and valuable for you. In order to make the long story short, I introduce the first couple of our exceptional speakers. They are Haris Iliopoulos, Chronia Polla Hari, and Panos Dimitriou, both cybersecurity entrepreneurs. And the topic is cybersecurity, assessing the past, predicting the future. Hari and Panos, the stage, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me share.
How to change the yeah, okay. Fantastic.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. So, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us. I mean, the organizers, SAE, ICBS, also Mars as well, in this online event. It's a great pleasure to participate. Just a small note from my side. This side of the table, and I'm referring to the speakers, we are a bit in a let's say, alert mode. So there might be some minor, probably none disruptions, or for example, I mean, our two international speakers might have some slight delay in joining. That's because of the Ukraine crisis. So, you know, the whole world is in alert mode, I mean, cybersecurity wise, because the physical war has not started, and we hope that will not, but the cyber war is extremely active during the last weeks. So especially the two international speakers from London and the UK, they're back to back in board meetings. So there might be some slight disruption, which I hope it will not be. So let's start. A figure that we all probably know, and we do know, I mean, Pablo Escobar, very popular recently also. That's because of I guess, the Narcos series in Netflix, etc. Pablo was considered is considered the wealthiest criminal in history, with a massive fortune. And I think at his days, I think he was number 7 as far as wealth was concerned. And of course, I mean, you know, he made money out of, you know, drug trafficking, which is also a massive market, which was estimated at the end of the year around 1% of the world GDP, which was around 1 trillion, making it the most profitable crime ever in the world. But things have changed a bit. And today, cybercrime is the most profitable crime in history. So we are talking about a market which is around 6 trillion annually, which is actually 6 times the drug trafficking market. And of course, I mean, it's quite difficult to size the market because very, very few security incidents are being reported. So the estimation is roughly around 6 trillion. And the question remains, I mean, why is this market that big? And why that market is so profitable? And the quick answer is that the possibility of being caught is close to 0%. So there's a big profitable market and the possibility of the criminal to be caught almost zero. So everybody that is willing to do, of course, is jumping on the cybersecurity wagon, the cybersecurity crime wagon. There are so many, let's say, statistics about cybersecurity. Some of them are very, very interesting. I recall some years back that we had a meeting with the global security officer of Diageo, which is a company that has all these big brands like Johnny Walker, etc. And the priority they had, I mean, was brand protection. That's our job. That's what we want to do. Whatever has to do with brand, we need to protect that. And she told us, I recall, that if I remember correctly, every 30 seconds, a Johnny Walker bottle is opened somewhere in the world, which is it's a crazy statistic. But what about this one? Every 11 seconds, a business falls victim to a ransomware attack, which is totally crazy. And the problem is that ransomware attacks have changed a lot. And it's not just trying to trick somebody to execute a ransomware file, which is actually ransomware, but it's far, far more advanced. So we see that global ransomware damage costs are reached actually 20 billion last year, which is 57 times more than 2015. And the question is, what's next? And the reason why this is very, very profitable as well, that's why all the cyber criminals are switching now to the malware business. So some other statistics, claim that the largest ransom ever demanded was 70 million, and the largest paid was 40 million. So it is extremely profitable business to be in the ransomware business, and that's why it has changed a lot. So advanced criminals actually first compromise systems and companies, and then themselves run the land and run the ransomware. And the reason why is because the question could be that, okay, from the moment that you compromise the whole system, the whole company, why do you need the ransomware? And then because it's very, very profitable is the answer. Also, the average cost of data breach goes higher. So from 3.86 million to 4.24 million. And of course, we see a lot of targeted attacks targeting small to medium size of enterprises. Again, the things are changing. The cybersecurity ecosystem is changing. So, for example, if I want to gain and sell, for example, credit cards, I don't do the attack myself. So I go and find somebody that is performing phishing attacks. Himself needs to send thousands and hundreds of thousands of emails, spam emails or whatever. Again, he does not the infrastructure, he rents the infrastructure, and that goes on and on and on. So we are talking about a metaverse of cybercrime. It's like a normal economy, but it's of course for crime. So everything is there. You can buy, you can rent, you can sell. There's a wholesaler, there are consumers. It's the same economy, but it's designed and well hidden for crime reasons. This is a very interesting example that we see recently. Initial access brokers. These guys provide already established access to compromised companies. So these guys compromise companies and they sell that capability to somebody else to do ransomware attacks. So they are there to sell their services. So from 86 active brokers in 2020, we spotted around 262 active as we speak. In a similar manner, you don't need to be an expert in cybersecurity or a criminal. You can run a ransomware attack as a service. There are companies out there hidden, well hidden in the cybercrime metaverse. That actually, that's their job and that's how they are making money. And of course, the money they make is, let's say, delivered, it's hidden, hidden and delivered via, Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, and decentralized financial systems. So what are we doing about it? For sure, when there is a problem, a solution needs to be found. So we see a lot of investments happening. It's a very hot sector. Cybersecurity is priority number one for organizations. And from the moment you find a solution that works, further money are being made. So in a big market like cybersecurity, which within the next year is going to reach $345 billion, we see a lot of investments happening. For example, last year, around 30 billion were invested from private equity and VCs in cybersecurity startups and companies. And also, from the moment the solutions are working, value goes up. So we see a lot of M&A happening around the globe. Last year, it was a record-breaking year with 77 billion of M&A, around 290 transactions, and 14 deals were valued above 1 billion. And of course, we see companies that actually the value is extremely high. So we had we have 30 unicorns from 6 last year. So the industry is reacting to this huge problem by investing as much money as possible in order to manage the problem. So here we are. We are in the middle of a crossfire. The first one is ransomware, as we mentioned. Supply chain cyber threats, scams, very new versions and very advanced, as well as we see also attacks happening at the sea level. Myself was a couple of times a target, thank God not a victim. So we see a lot of attacks happening, against the C-suite. So I'm handing over to Panos, who will go in detail in each one of these, crossfire. Problems.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you. I'd like also to thank everybody here, and of course, that invited us. Harry, I will change to my slide, to my deck, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Just a moment to find it also. Okay, so I suppose you can see it. Right. So let me start with corporate ransomware. So we wanted to focus our journey on the threat landscape to understand on the main threats that are, let's say, across industries. So one is corporate ransomware, as Harry said. The other one is supply chain, and we'll discuss about it, how it changes everything. The new age of scamming, and of course, attacks against the actual higher level executives, the C-suite, as we call it. So let's go and see some examples just to understand what we're talking about. And these are examples that have made the headlines, but it's good examples to understand some techniques being used for the attackers in order to make sure they will get money out of it, to understand the impacts, both at the company level, but sometimes even at the society or the country level, and give us an idea of what we are up against. Many of you might have heard the Colonial Pipeline on May 2021. The Colonial Pipeline supplies most of the fuel for the East Coast of the US, has been hit by ransomware attack. Not only they use what we call the double extortion. This is a technique that's being used right now in order for the actors, for the criminals, to make sure the payment will come up. And it is not just to make the whole digital environment inoperable and encrypted actually, but also to exfiltrate and leak data, sensitive data. So in case the victim / client doesn't pay up, to leak this data outside. So this makes it, let's say, what we call the double extortion. So there was a huge shortage throughout the East Coast for at least 6 days. It was horrific. Prices went up, and eventually Colonial Pipeline paid 4.4 million ransom to hackers. Just to have an idea, the whole thing started by one password on a VPN system that allowed the hackers to get in. So as Harry said, when we talk about corporate ransomware, it's not like we knew back in 2015 or 14 that it was a shotgun approach. Somebody sent emails, phishing emails to a bunch of, I don't know, to email lists they have, and they waited for somebody to be victimized. Now they go for a specific company, they get in, they stay here, they stay there for days or even up weeks, usually days to weeks, up to months, in order to get access to most of the digital environment. And when they're ready, then they start encrypting every system and every data inside the network. And although for the victims, or it seems to happen overnight, this is a rather prolonged kind of targeted attack. The next one, just to see, let's say, the variety of targets, JBS Meat. I didn't know the company before, but it's a Brazilian company that supplies approximately 1/5 of meat globally. So they had a huge incident, factories and operations closed in Australia, Canada, and mainly the US. A funny kind of note that the US Department of Agriculture was unable to offer wholesale beef prices on June 1st because of JBS being out of business for some time. They decided to pay 1 million in ransom to hackers. And just to understand, only 12 months before JBS, there were at least another 40 reported known attacks on food producers. So it's not only it can be everybody, and we have seen this. You probably have seen this even in Greece and elsewhere. So, as Harry said, the biggest ever payout to the criminals, CNA Financial Corp, 50,000 devices encrypted, notified 75,000 of their clients, individuals, that their data may have been compromised, and they decided to pay 40 million to the hackers just to be able to operate again. And again, the funny story, it's although it started internally, remote working employees connecting to the company's private network have been also affected. The moment they connected, they have been also being victims. So, trends we see on the corporate ransomware threats. So, as we said, recent history ransomware started with a shotgun approach. Very low tech back in 2014, 15. Very low tech, smash and grab kind of thing. From 2015 onwards, it's a nice, let's say, milestone where US and China signed up a cyber pact, meaning we're going to hack each other at the national level. Please, said the Chinese, stop hacking enterprises for intellectual property. Pretty much this has been, for a couple of years, let's say, has been followed by China. But a lot of state-sponsored hackers from China let's say, left without a job, and they switched to cybercrime. So from 2015 onwards, the whole techniques that nation states and state-sponsored hacker groups, very advanced, have been using to infiltrate one another, have started to shift to the cybercrime, let's say, industry. Still, Eastern Europeans are the main force behind such cybercrime, and they moved the whole thing from shotgun to targeted to corporate ransomware, and as we're gonna see also to, as we saw also, to an ecosystem with initial access brokers, with ransomware as a service, actually industrializing the crime. The next thing we see right now, and it will be one of the main trends of the future, is supply chain attacks. It's the next one down the road. We're going to describe the whole idea. It's compromise one, breach many. Double extortion for ensuring payouts, not just making the whole operations inoperable, the whole digital environment, actually the business operations, but also exfiltrating data and holding the client on ransom, also for not leaking this sensitive data to the internet at large. And with payouts and demands rising by 500% and 80% respectively, and with a business that has a compound annual growth rate, amazing compound annual growth rate from 2015 until now, it won't go away. So where we're heading, of course, the ecosystem will grow a lot more. And we see triple extortion or multi-extortion. So not only holding on ransom the main target, but if the main target, let's say, happens to be somebody that processes third-party data, third-party valuable data, like a healthcare organization, like a data processor, whatever, then they go to the clients. There was a case in Finland, if I remember correctly, a psychotherapeutic hospital has been had such an incident. Apart for taking them out, they went to each and every of the patients and asking for ransom in order not to leak their data outside. But we also see a lot of political, diplomatic, and legal actions against ransomware actors. And we're going to see one example when we'll talk about the supply chain. This changes a bit the whole thing. Doesn't, let's say, deters them, because still it's a very low prosecution rate, or the ability to even touch most of them. It's if they don't go for big targets like Colonial Pipeline and the one we'll see in the supply chain, usually they're out of the woods. So supply chain threats, as we said, it's either compromise one, breach many, which is the main thing, or go after the weakest link. So let's see some examples. The most notable one, although not the first one, but the one that was a turning point, it was the SolarWinds hack, as we call it, back in 2020. So hackers, actually it was allegedly the Russian spy agency, broke into a Texas-based company called SolarWinds that provides IT management software to pretty much everybody, and added malicious code into the command software. So during the update, each and every one of the clients got the malicious code into the system. And there were a lot. There were at least 18,000 government and private computer networks potentially affected that got the malicious software in that. And out of these 18,000 targets, the threat actors worked, let's say, actually and actively exploited around 100. Big names, everybody, from Microsoft, Cisco, NASA, Intel, Deloitte, NVIDIA, VMware, FireEye, a security company, a cybersecurity vendor, and especially one that provides a lot of incident response in cases like that, was actually a victim of that, and was the ones that unearthed the whole attack from some clues that they have seen in their environment, but already data of them had been disclosed, had been exfiltrated, then disclosed. And of course, a lot of government in the US. So this was a turning point, in a sense. As it was back in 2011, the hack of another security company, RSA, that it was a wake-up call that this can happen to everybody, and the whole, let's say, paradigm changed from a basic security hygiene to a more to a strategy that it's more focused on detection and response, saying that okay, bad things will happen, so we need to do what we have to do to be able to quickly detect and respond to these threats The SolarWinds hack, sorry, was the same turning point for supply chain. Although we had supply chain threats and attacks before, even in Ukraine many years ago, with the accounting software. That this one, it was the one that let's say shocked the whole industry. And the cyber criminals were not far behind; they followed very quickly. So in 2021, a company that, although listed in Nasdaq, I think, not very known. It's an IT company that provides IT solutions for managed service providers and enterprises, but mainly focused on managed service providers. Had a vulnerability in one of the technologies was exploited, and a specific software of Kaseya was implanted with malicious code. So actually, the piggybacked managed service providers and the software in order to attack and actually compromise 1,500 companies, Kaseya's clients, and run the ransomware on their systems. Very big companies around the world have been affected, from Coop in Sweden. It was, if from one source you can run a ransomware attack, corporate ransomware attack against 1,500 companies, it's a big thing. So the group that did that, Reveal, asked for $70 million in ransomware. Eventually, they didn't took it. Why? Because Kaseya somehow obtained the key from a trusted third party. The funny story is that this happened on May 2021, or June, sorry. So on the 9th of July, President Biden called Putin and about this event. On the 13th of July, Reveal's websites and other infrastructure vanished from the internet. And on the 23rd of July, just 14 days after that, Kaseya announced it received the universal decryption tool from a trusted third-party source. And by the way, it's worth knowing that on January 14th this year, the Russia's domestic security agency arrested 14 alleged members of the Reveal group and told the US that they have eliminated the group at Washington's request. So because these guys were they were making like $100 million per year or even more. This is, and let's say they had a very high profile. They went after Kaseya in a supply chain attack, they went after Colonial Pipeline. Eventually has been, let's say, the scapegoat of the industry, but there are so many others like that. So, sorry. But there is more in supply chain than suppliers, vendors, and partners. A very small example, has nothing to do with the cybersecurity, but it's very indicative, very illustrative on the dependencies right now we face on the infrastructure we run our businesses on. So back in 2019, and this grounded developer unpublished 11 lines of code he had published, open source code. And large companies, including Facebook, Netflix, Spotify, were affected because the lack of this code that were used by their systems. Imagine this in cybersecurity. Has happened first in 2014. A vulnerability was found in an open source library and used for attacking, actually used for the encrypted communications that we have on our websites, on our VPNs. And they launched mayhem in the whole of internet. And now, on the December 21, another small piece of software, it's called Log4j or Log4, it doesn't matter, used by thousands of commercial applications and business systems, even security ones, had the vulnerability in it, was very easy to exploit. The moment it was identified, there have been millions of attacks within days. The first exploitation detected in Minecraft for crypto mining, but then the big boys also came in. So the state sponsored the cybercrimes. So it's your supply chain, it's more than your suppliers, vendors, and partners. You can have a software running on your environment that has an open source dependency with something else, and boom, you find yourself compromised. So going to more, let's say, down to earth, but very critical, let's see the new age of scamming. So there are three letters, might be most of you haven't heard, BEC, but probably you have already felt. And what BEC is all about, it stands for Business Email Compromise, under which in our industry, we put pretty much everything that's fraud related through a social engineering kind of technique, like CEO fraud and the likes. So what's business email compromise? Cyber criminals use social engineering to trick an employee at a business into transferring a large sum of money to an account controlled by the offenders. Usual techniques, email impersonation, email spoofing, but mainly email account takeover. So they actually compromise one mail account or even more than one mail accounts, the whole email server, and they get into a conversation, into a valid conversation, and they stop it and they inject their messages. So let's say you have a supplier, you have he has an invoice pending for you, and at one time you get an email from your supplier saying, okay, my IBAN changed from this to that, so please, for this specific invoice with specific everything valid, transfer the amount to this new account. This happens every day. This happens. Everybody has felt this. Harry told us we have been attacked even with this kind of fraud, and can be out of your real. So your supplier might be compromised. It's not that, okay, I have secured my environment, so I know my mail is okay. I use two-factor authentication and all the gizmos that the security guys say. It can be out of your real. It can be your supplier might be compromised, and then you're gonna get the victim. There are so many cases around that, from startups, the VC to a startup sending the money to another account. So there are so many stories about that. So, but let's see the numbers. So in 2020, the whole BEC, business email compromise fraud, caused 1.8 billion worth of losses, and this is direct losses, which is much more than the direct losses that ransomware made up. So, okay, ransomware is worse because it's not the direct losses, but it's not the ransom that you're gonna pay to the criminals. It's mainly all the rest. It's the loss of the downside, the loss of business, the operational disruption, the recovery costs. These are count much more. But still, as a direct losses, BEC, business email compromise, it's 37%. It's much bigger than ransomware losses. Incidents range from a few tens of thousands to up to tens of millions. The biggest one was like, that I know, was around $60 million. We have seen other cases with a couple of millions, so it's very common, and can be everybody. It's virtually every company, from SMEs or even to huge corporations, even tech-savvy ones. And we have seen this kind of fraud, this kind of scamming go to a new level. This is from back, I think it was 2019 when this happened. Scammers use deep fakes, so artificial AI-powered voice technology to impersonate the voice of CEO and defraud a specific company. So it was an unnamed UK-based company that the group, let's say, belonged to a group with a German headquarters. So they actually scammed the CEO of the UK company to transfer around 200,000 euros to the fraudsters by calling them and using AI-powered voice technology to impersonate the German CEO. So, but for sure, BEC, business email compromise, type of threats like CEO fraud, and will be persist and grow. The work from home and the hybrid workplace makes them more successful because we are not all in the same place. So it's not that easy, for example, to go and pick up the phone or verify. So sometimes we are used to do things through chat, through WhatsApps, through mails, and use and of data leaked from other attacks are being used both to establish victims and to establish trust during these kind of scams. And the deepfakes and the AI will be in the works for this new age of scams in the future. Already there have been, let's say, cases like that, and more will happen in the future. So the last one is going after the C-suite. Executive cyber risk for executives, not from the executives have a lot of challenges already on regarding what's happening on the companies they run, but they are also a target of their own. Why? Because they have, let's say, access to a lot of data, and as we'll see, sometimes security for them, for CEOs, mainly high-ranking executives, it's more relaxed, like than let's say other humble mortals in the company. So it's not a new threat. Back in 2014, Kaspersky has identified a campaign that it's called Dark Hotel, where specifically it was state sponsored, though then attackers were compromising hotels and using their Wi-Fi to then attack specific guests. And they were very selective with the guests because not all of visitors' PCs and laptops were compromised, but only the ones they wanted. And also they seem to have a lot of advanced knowledge of their victims' whereabouts, traveling plans, and so on and so forth. But it's still going on. And this is a few days ago, January 28th. Hackers are going after CEO accounts with rogue authentication apps, like probably some of you use Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator to get into your cloud services or Office 365 accounts. They published and they faked ones, and they do in order to get the passwords from CEOs. So very quickly, why CEOs are victims? Not because they're easier to phish. No, it's as easy as everybody, but because they have a lot of access data, and sometimes they admit that they're bypassing security to get done things faster. So they're usually 12 times more likely to be target and 9 times more likely to be victimized. So what we'll see, more CEO fraud happening, and whaling. Whaling is phishing for the big fish, for the high value or high access targets, and widening the hunting ground. Going for the home environment, we've seen cases like that, related persons, family assistants, tax and legal advisors, going for them when traveling, their IoTs and smart devices and so on and so forth. And of course, taking advantage of the cloud and the new normal and modus operandi of the new normal in order to make it easier to compromise them. We're outside of the company's, let's say, security boundaries. So what we see forward, because I'm running out of time, how security will evolve. So we see the cybersecurity market very quickly. Cyber resilience. William will discuss more about that. But cyber resilience, it's all about being able to operate under an environment of constant attacks and also security breaches. So we believe that cyber resilience will be the new basic security hygiene. So detection and response capabilities are key for achieving this and will become much more the mainstream, while other advanced capabilities, now only for the big guys, will be democratized, as we say, for being able to address more advanced threats such as supply chain ones. Anywhere operations. Right now, we are running, most of us living in anywhere operations kind of environment, both from a personnel point of view, but also from applications and workloads point of view. So anywhere operations need anywhere protection. So we'll go to what it's called zero trust access model architectures, where actually what you say you trust nobody, but you continue to verify it. So this is the whole idea about that. Nobody has even devices, mainly this is for devices and persons, as far as the access to your environment data, and extending the cybersecurity risks and controls, being detective or preventative, wherever the person's data and applications are. Identity first cybersecurity. This is something will be a huge identity will be a huge thing in the years to come. Identity is king, because all this scamming, all these are based on misrepresenting identity. So even ransomware attacks, in some they might start like this. So trends we see becoming our own passwords. There's a huge trend right now to go passwordless and use mobile phones and our own biometrics. We usually Face ID or fingerprints to get into our data applications and digital environments. Identity verification, secure out of band means for notification. So all these things we envision that will come in order to address the trust problem, because now we are in a deteriorating trust environment, and continuous identity verification. And last, and definitely not least, collective defense. We still, as companies, bigger or smaller, operate in silos when it comes to cybersecurity. We have very small windows of cooperation, be it through threat intelligence or law enforcement. This cannot. When the attackers, when the criminals, they have a whole ecosystems. We still operate in silos. So we see things happening in collective defense. So to break both intra and inter-company silos, because there are a lot of intra-company silos also, in order to get advanced early warnings and capabilities of augmentation through trusted communities. On the market side, budgets, okay, there are outliers out there like BOFA, Bank of America, having 1 billion cybersecurity budget per year, but the average it's still 5.7% of IT spending, or $600 per employee. It will remain the same with a few adjustments. So, but the main thing here is smart spending and finding alternative ways to obtain critical capabilities. Cybersecurity is also all about obtaining critical capabilities. Can be as a service, as a software, but you need to have critical capabilities and not gizmos. Investments, Harry nailed it. Yes, they're close to 30 billion, both private equity, VC capital, and not slowing down on that. When you have a 6 trillion problem, and right now it's around less than $200 billion market, there is a lot of room there for new ideas. Government will definitely, for better and worse, will definitely be more influential, and we'll see more intervention in cybersecurity. We have seen it already, and more regulations, more scrutiny. These are good things to a certain extent, but also bad, because sometimes they save the market to a specific extent, and we have seen all the compliance frenzy of the early zeros that made security being more compliance and a burden. And when the real bad things started to happen, companies understood that they were just only compliance. And compliance was just the floor that they will land when the real things will happen. So usually government intervention is both good and bad, but we have to cope with that. Hopefully it won't save the market again to a compliance-driven security, but still to an outcome-driven one. And security as a business advantage. So Apple has done it. If you think of Apple, one of the main things in the strategy, and now it's also privacy, it's using security as a business advantage. And now it uses its privacy, let's say, as a leverage against their competitors. So Apple has has played this fantastically. So how to use security as a business advantage, how to use security and privacy in order to form market dominance. But okay, this is the logical extreme. apart from a business enabler, so security should not be, we cannot do that. There is no, we cannot do that. We have to do this. Business comes first, and we have to do it in a secure manner. But it can be as a business advantage when you can provide better, safer customer experience, when it's a mandatory for product adoption, especially in the digital era, and as Apple, so it can be used also for market dominance. That's it from us. Sorry for taking a lot of more time. Thank you very much. And now I'm handing over to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Panos and Harry. Thank you very much. What I keep from, especially from what Panos, it was impressive from what Panos said is that how much creative is the cyber crime. It is very creative and very intelligent, and has to and can affect everybody, individuals, governments, corporations. But on the other side, I keep something very positive from what Harry said, that fortunately the cyber protection industry is booming also. So yes, we could be a little bit optimist because of these investments and this technology, which helps to some kind of protection from cyber crime. Let's now pass to the second couple of our speakers, and they will be more specific to the C-suite and board members level, and they will analyze the liability for us arising from cyber risk. They are George Melidis, both gentlemen from Mars. George Melidis from Mars, Greece, and Jean Bayon de la Tour from Mars, Continental Europe. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Angelos. Let us share our presentation. It's great. So, good afternoon. Thank you to everyone who's attending our presentation. The topic, as was mentioned earlier, is about C-suite and board liability arising from cyber risk. And what do we, one of the elements that is quite clear in recent years is that cybersecurity has actually gone from a niche concern to a quite serious topic for businesses. Organizations realize that cyber risk has become an inevitable part of their day-to-day operations, as it clearly affects and causes disruption across numerous areas, such as business plans, such as strategy, and it's affecting the operational aspect of a business, and may even affect its own survival. As digital transformation is increasing, as the rollout and additional rollout, as the rollout of technology and adoption of Internet of Things devices into operations is increasing, this will gradually start, as it gets more involved into business activities. In the future, it may affect it may cause physical harm to individuals, to people. It may cause destruction of property, and governments and regulators to become more active, act promptly, and introduce new rules and regulations. And in that environment, no one would be able to plead ignorance. So cyber risk is disrupting, and is disrupting not only in terms of its operations, but can also be disruptive in terms of damaging litigation, particularly if organizations don't follow the appropriate rules and regulations. So as we are seeing that and understanding what is the role and responsibility of directors and board directors, I think it poses a very clear doubt to anyone's mind. Does cyber risk pose a threat to personal liability? That's an absolute yes. It's not just a threat that is arising. It's not an emerging threat. It's something that is here to stay. But Jean, you also had some additional ideas about this aspect. You want to share some things with us?
Yes, sure. Thanks, and thanks, George, and thanks for inviting us and for inviting me. And I mean, clearly, if we take a step back, I mean, what is the purpose of a company, of any company? It's to make profit for the shareholders, to be profitable in order to pay the employees, and to make it a healthy business. But it's also to build the necessary trust with the clients, with the partners, with the shareholders, once again, and to build that trust and to maintain that trust. And cyber risk is able, I mean, to destroy these two at the same time. We saw some cases in the headlines in the newspapers. There has been some examples in the previous presentation. And who is responsible to maintain the trust, to guide the boat? It's the board, it's the CEO. And that's why we are now changing fast. And in the 80s, in the 90s, 2000, the most important was the financial stability and the S&P notation, the view from private equity firms or a capital market of your financial strengths. And now there are two new reports that are important when you're assessing a company. There is the ESG report. It's not the topic of today, but I think it's important to mention it. And also the cyber resilience, the cybersecurity report. And as Marsh, we are involved, for instance, in the due diligence of private equity funds. And this is clearly something for the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years that they are looking more and more importantly. Of course, financial remains important, but cybersecurity is a key topic. And the assessment on how it is operated, how it is managed by the top management is absolutely key in that respect. Same for the financial markets that are asking always more, some metrics. There are some IT security rating agencies that are emerging. There's some debate on if they do properly their job. Same for Moody's and S&P, by the way. So it is something that is building and showing clearly the role of the management to create this awareness and to push in a top-down process this cybersecurity topic across the company.
Excellent. So what John, thank you, John. What John described, and one area to reiterate here, is the concept of trust. Trust, it's almost equating a breach, a cyber breach, to a breach of trust. And who is most responsible party to be able to maintain and build and develop that trust with a number of stakeholders like customers, employees, shareholders, suppliers? It's the CEO. He's the person responsible for that. And to be able to achieve that trust, maintain that trust, then there's a requirement to shift the way of management. There's a need to change the board agenda to introduce a new, a more effective, and more agile board. So this is really what we're going to be discussing a little bit further here in terms of how a CEO, how a board should be able to approach the issue of cyber risk. The first step is first and foremost linking strategy to cyber risk. We already heard, even in the previous session, how cyber risk cuts across many different types of risk organizations affect today. Financial risk, business risk, reputational risk, all these elements are forming together. But it's quite important that to understand that cyber risk cuts across all these elements. So all these elements need to be viewed, need to be seen under the lens of cyber risk and the impact that this will have in very simple business activities that corporations consider normal and standard today. The expanding into a new geography, introduction of a new product, M&A activity. These are just examples that have to be seen under the lens of cyber risk. So it's not an isolated or standalone issue, but it actually requires a more holistic approach. The other element is about cyber risk governance. And what do we mean by cyber risk governance? We're talking about a distinct framework that an organization needs to adopt to be able to deal with new and evolving risks that are coming out of the cyberspace that are either arising within the organization or outside of the organization. And we're going to talk about a little bit further in the following slides about this. What is really key and what's really important is that this discussion must be led, this initiative must be led by the CEO. The CEO is the one that needs to take charge. And we're not talking about just a participation or a simple, a rare engagement. We're talking about actual direct involvement, not oversight, on a very frequent and regular basis, rather than just monitoring everything that is happening or monitoring what other people are doing and what they're implementing into the organization. And the more complex the business, meaning complexity in terms of its nature of business, the data that it may hold, features effectively that affect their those activities, then the more leadership and support is required, not just from the CEO, but from the top executive team, the brightest minds that sit on the that sit and manage and lead an organization. And we also
George, we have a problem.
Yeah, I think we have a.
Can you hear me?
Ah, yeah, George, you're back.
No, yes.
Welcome back.
Okay. So let me repeat just the.
It was not a cyber
Hopefully not.
incident something. We hope. Okay.
Not a
Let's go
cyber
ahead.
incident. No. not
Okay. Okay.
So the other part, the other action that companies need to look at in terms of their corporate governance would be the introduction and the introduction of a cyber risk committee. This would be a completely separate, sitting outside of the risk committee. So understanding, because of the issues and the extent that cyber risk has in today's operations, needs to be viewed separately. That risk committee must be led by the CEO and should have the Chief Information Security Officer as a permanent member of that committee. That committee should actually report directly to the board, rather than, as I said, not to the risk committee, and should make sure that to be able to deal with these emerging issues, that they receive sufficient input from the board members. So also to assist the board members not to be hampered and not to be heavily involved in works and processes that are not their specialization or is not their bread and butter, to put it differently. So what would cyber risk governance be able to introduce and bring to the organization? What should be aiming to bring is the introduction of a cyber resilient culture. And what do we mean by cyber resilient culture? It would be a culture where it would be able to help all its employees understand how they would be able to tackle cyber threats, having the right mechanism, having the support of the appropriate mechanisms available, and also by displaying and affecting the appropriate and the desired behaviors. So that cyber resilient culture should operate in four dimensions. You have the framework, the policies and procedures that pretty much set the rules in terms of prevention and incident response, combined with people-oriented measures to ensure that there is adequate adoption. Training methodology, training sessions, manuals, all these areas to be able to actually, all these measures that would be able to support individuals, show the, shift the behavioral change and displaying those changes across the various teams, either internally in the organization, but also externally in terms of what is expected, what should be anticipated by clients, suppliers, and every other party, third party that the company is dealing with. And all these elements should be complemented by clear communication roles and continuous improvement measures. It's a very dynamic, it's a culture that should be dynamic, that all dimensions should be working together to ensure the best possible result. So having seen this, this element of governance, let's take one step a little bit lower to some of the more tangible solutions that are available. So Jean, you want to guide us through this?
Yes, thanks. And clearly, I mean, the governance is absolutely critical to put in place and to have this body, but then it needs to be cascaded and lead to some decisions and tools and investments. And in our view, there are two families of tools that can be considered by a company to protect against cyber risk. The first category will focus on reducing the frequency, and the second one to reduce the severity, and both are important. On the frequency side, it is about IT security tools in general. So, I mean, we spoke about firewalls, on all these antiviruses. We mentioned the same budget, 5 to 7% of the IT budget that has been mentioned earlier by Panos. And here it's about implementing the right tools, and there are a lot of innovation in that space. It is changing quickly. We could mention also other types of initiatives like cybersecurity training. When we speak about the cybersecurity culture, it comes with training, and this is more in the lead of the HR leader of the company rather than the CISO, the IT security professionals. On the other side, reducing severity, this is about mostly cyber insurance that will be this unique tool in order to mitigate in case the risk is happening. So reducing the frequency to avoid it, or severity on that side. And here it's more led by the CFO, by the risk management. And that's why, I mean, there are so many business units. It's another reason why the sponsorship is falling into the hand of the CEO and nobody else. It's not led by the CISO, by the HR leader or CFO. It's gone up to the CFO. If we do a bit of a drill and of a deep dive on cyber insurance, and we see and we wanted to share with you the key reasons why C-suite, why CEOs are considering and are buying more and more this tool as one brick to fight against the cyber threat. It is a 20 years old product, more or less, and it's becoming more and more the case across Europe, across middle market companies, across large groups. So first of all, there is a financial piece. They reimburse the financial losses. And for SME company, it's a question of avoiding the bankruptcies, because the treasury can be a bit on the edge, the situation can be a bit difficult, and a small cyber event can create this bankruptcy. And unfortunately, we saw that cases across Europe too many times. For large risk, it's a bit different for large companies, because usually the balance sheet is a bit stronger. So it will be more to avoid the volatility in results, to avoid the profit warning, to take care of the dividend for the shareholders, to protect the directors and officers. It's an easy way to prove that some investments has been made in cybersecurity, in cyber insurance. But still, I mean, the financial part is of course absolutely key. Also for middle market, for SME, there is a crisis management support in the cyber insurance policies, a 24/7 call center, and then that will help to react promptly and to have the right experts. We are discussing about ransomware, to pay or not to pay. That's a very important question. And the goal is to take the right informed decision with the right experts that will guide the companies in order to take the right decision. Always trying to not pay, but we have to be pragmatic. Happy to discuss about that. Also, we see more and more pressure from third parties. It can be banks, it can be private equity funds. I spoke about it earlier, that are requiring or clients that are requiring cyber insurance certificate, we were talking about trust. This is one tool in order to enable more trust, and more trust is more business at the end of the day. And that's what are the key drivers of the development of this product as one product, once again, part of the galaxy of product to fight against cyber threats.
That's great. And John, you know, very often it comes to the, you know, to a lot of publications. Everybody's asking, you know, everybody's talking about, particularly on the insurance side, about the cyber market, about how volatile it is, where it actually stands right now. So do you want to give us a little bit of an overview in terms of, you know, what do we see right now on the global insurance market, or cyber insurance market?
Yes, effectively, yeah. The cyber market was developing fast since beginning of 2000, and in 2020 there has been this huge wave of ransomware, and basically the cyber insurance market worked. It paid claims, but it paid more claims than the premium that was received by insurers. Hence, not profitability from insurers, and we went into what we call the hard market, which means that insurers are hardening terms in order to bring back their book of business to profitability. What it means: higher rates, higher premium, sometimes close to double. They were also requesting and imposing more information in terms of cybersecurity measures that are in place in order to fight against ransomware specifically. And here, coming back to the two types of tools, frequency and severity, they are requiring insurers more and more information and more prerequisite in terms of cybersecurity tools. And it's exactly like your home insurance. If you don't have a locker in your door, I will not insure you. If you don't have some basic cybersecurity tools in place in order to mitigate the risk, I will not insure you. And that's where we see the virtuous circle of insurance that is pushing all the companies for a better resilience. And this is what we see a bit violently, because they become very tough very shortly, but they are pushing the clients in order to have a better resilience. And this is all about the prevention, what we like to do in the insurance industry. That's what we see, but there are still a lot of insurers that are proposing cyber insurance policies across Greece, Europe, and across the globe.
And one comment I would also add on that aspect, what is also affecting or impacting the cyber market trend, is that a lot of the insurers have tried to remove any kind of cyber exposure from the traditional insurance policies on the property and casualty side. So as insurers are actually removing what we know, or what is called in the insurance world as silent cyber, and it's getting out of those traditional property policies, it also raises the alarm, or it should raise the alarm to a lot of the buyers, to a lot of the companies, that risk is no longer protected under the traditional P&C program. So alternative solutions should be seen. So as we come to the end of our session, of our presentation, we'd like to sum up some of the points, some of the elements that we discussed a little bit earlier. How in all actuality, effective boards are the ones that deliver an effective cyber risk governance. So what does that really translate to? First and foremost, visible leadership, the tone from the top. You got to be, the board and the CEO should be very clear in their messaging, in their communication, in their behaviors, of what they're displaying in the organization. If they expect everyone who they deal with, whether it is internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, to have the exact same behavior. It's very important, as we described earlier, the link between strategy, business strategy, and cyber risk must be done. There's an over everyday expanding operations are, with the rollout of new technologies, are coming more and into the cyber risk space. You cannot just isolate and put, the two elements separate from each other. You gotta see it under the same lens. Cyber risk governance should form a part, and that comes together with building a robust cyber resilient culture in the organization to be able to handle those issues. And last but not least, culture is the one element, but they're not entirely set on their own. There are risk mitigation, risk transfer solutions that can complement that culture, that can complement that governance, but they're not the solution to every single thing. And
maybe
that,
a bit of optimism, maybe just to finish also and link to the previous comments at the end of the first presentation. I'm very optimistic because they are by definition in advance, the hackers, the threat actors, but we are more people. If we gather all our force in the private sector, in the public sector, we have the right governance, the right way to work together and to fight against this threat. We will be hacked, but if we are back to business fast, because we are well organized, then they will have lost their battle. We will have won the war. So that's the positive for the end.
that's absolutely great. And with that, we'd like to thank you for your attention. Back to you.
Thank you very much. George, it was impressive how many things the CEOs have to do, and the new direct responsibilities they have around cybersecurity.
Well,
it is new job. It is a new part of a job. It is
the threat is suddenly hanging above a lot of people's head.
And also something very interesting. I keep this word. I underline this word. Is the word culture. Our companies they must change the cyber resilient culture, and this is very important for the character of the companies and the trust that our companies create, the additional trust that our companies create to the stakeholders and the investors. This is very important. This is very important. I would like to remind to all the attendants that they can put their questions to the chat, and at the end of the event, please address the name, write the name to whom you address the question. And now it is the time to pass to our next speaker, Mr. William Beer. He is from Accenture, US, and the topic is cybersecurity for business leaders in the era of digital everything. I like this digital everything. Our life has been changed already. Okay, William.
Well, thank you, Angelos. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you also, Georgios and Jean. I think you set the scene for a really interesting discussion. And I don't have any slides today. I figured it would be easier if I just chatted with you for a couple of minutes. But before we get started, I wanted to ask everyone to help me out, basically. If I could ask you the following question. How concerned are you on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very concerned, about the situation between Russia and the Ukraine? If you could just put the number of which represents your level of concern in the chat, I would be grateful. I know what mine is. I see a 3, a 4, number 5. Thank you, Robert. Doesn't surprise me. I think our paths crossed a long time ago in London. So lots of interesting numbers. Thank you, everyone, for your input. And obviously, as I reflect on this, I live in New York, so I'm quite a ways away now, but spent many years in Europe. I mean, obviously, Greece is a NATO member, right? And I think we'll circle back to that in a minute. But clearly, the situation as it currently stands between Russia and the Ukraine is causing a lot of concern at the top of the house, at board meetings. I was actually just in a board meeting, and the conversation was actually extended to discuss this very topic. So I wanted to talk today quickly about cyber resilience and build on some of the excellent comments that my colleagues made previously. But it's true, as the complexity and the amount of systems being migrated to not just cloud, but complex digital systems increases all the time. What we're starting to see is that a lot of existing ways of doing cybersecurity are no longer sufficient. They're not as comprehensive as they need to be. The skill sets are not necessarily there. And again, there's a lot of concern taking place in business-to-business discussions at the top of the house. So today I really wanted to touch on three main points. Talk about what is cyber resilience and what's in the scope of a world-class program. And I may ask more comments and input from you as an audience. Talk a little bit about the business benefits. And then the final step will touch on the practical steps and maybe some lessons learned based on work I've done. But any point during the conversation, please, if you have comments or questions or feedback, or you don't agree with what I'm saying, please feel free to chime in. So before I get started, I'll just ask you one more question. How many of you have heard of Whispergate? Yes or no? And I see some nodding heads. Have any of you heard of Whispergate? No, no, no. So our friends across at Microsoft recently identified a piece of malware, malicious malware, which is actually posing as ransomware, which is really interesting. So malware, destructive malware, but it's posing as ransomware, which has been discovered on dozens of systems in the Ukraine. And they believe it has origins from Russia. And so again, we are already starting to see potential indications that the heightened geopolitical tension between Russia and the Ukraine risks that innocent firms across the globe could get caught in the crosshair. So let's talk a little bit about what cyber resiliency means. I think NIST here in the United States is a very good definition. Their definition of cyber resiliency is the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromise on systems that can be enabled by cyber resources. So quite a far-reaching definition. But I think the key point to me when I think about cyber resiliency is the ability to bounce back, right? It's not so much the problem or the risk of being attacked, but it's the ability to bounce back and the ability to bounce back quickly. And I think that what we have seen in terms of, world-class or leading cyber resiliency programs are programs that are an extension of traditional disaster recovery and BC. A lot of folks, I think, get things confused when they think about cyber resiliency. A lot of them think that they have the situation covered with their BC and their DR programs. But clearly, when you take into consideration things like the situation in Russia and the Ukraine, you think about advanced and complex malware, a lot of the traditional DR and BC programs are no longer going to be sufficient to be able to bounce back. And a lot of it comes down to recovery times, right? I recently ran a simulation exercise for an investment bank here in New York, and it was focused on cyber resiliency. And what I think was so interesting and so concerning to the board of directors was there was a mismatch between the CIO and the CISO's ability to bring the business back online after a massive attack. And the business basically had expectations that were not aligned with what the CIO and the CISO were able to deliver on. And the overarching comment and the overarching finding at the end of that exercise was if the bank was not able to be brought back online after a massive ransomware attack, it would actually be terminal to the business. Clients would trade away. And so I think that there's still a fair amount of confusion in the industry around what cyber resiliency means. but I think our friends at NIST have done a very good job of at least offering the industry an indication of what a good definition looks like. And I think my main takeaway from the NIST definition is the ability to bounce back, or the ability to respond. So maybe I'll just pause there and ask if there are any questions or comments. Please feel free to raise your hand or put any comments in the chat, or even feedback on what I've just said. Any comments so far? Harris, maybe I can pick on you. I think you're on mute, Harris.
Yeah. I mean, who will lead, or this cyber resilience program? I mean, because you mentioned, I mean, something between the CISO, between the disaster recovery and this continuity area. Who is the leader within an organization? I mean, at least in the in the part of the world that you are familiar with.
That's a great question, and thank you for that. And I apologize for picking on you, Harris, but we've known each other for many years, so I figured I could. What I've seen here, so I live in the United States, and my work is primarily with large financial service organizations. And what is interesting is that the head of cyber resiliency oftentimes is not underneath the CISO. We've seen a shift of roles from the first line of defense into the second line of defense. So I'm sure you're all aware of the 3-line of defense model, which is in use at most mature financial service organizations. And if you're not, you may want to Google 3 lines of defense, and it'll give you a little bit of details and explanation of how that works. But generally speaking, in most organizations, the CISO sits in the first line, and then the second line is operational and technical risk. And what I've seen, Harris, in most of the advanced or the more mature financial service organizations that I deal with, there is an individual and or a team in the second line who has oversight and responsibility for cyber resiliency. And I think that's a good thing, because I do think that they've got a broader perspective on what cyber resiliency means. They see it as a component of operational resiliency, and they understand that it's not just about technology. So I think that the ownership is key. It's not always that way, but I think the more mature organizations I've dealt with, generally speaking, it sits in the second line. Any other comments or feedback on what I've said so far?
William, do you think that not especially in US, but in the other in Europe, for example, the governments could play a role to the direction to put regulations around the cyber resilience?
Angelos, it's a great question. And I would say, to their credit, the Bank of England in the United Kingdom was probably one of the leading government organizations that initiated and started to raise awareness around the importance of resilience. I'll be frank, even though I spent 15, maybe 20 years of my life in Europe, I'm now very much focused on the US markets. And so I'm not up to speed on the latest and greatest directions from the European regulators. But I think for such a complex and far-reaching topics such as cyber resiliency, the government and the regulators do have a role to play. I think that after the good work done by the Bank of England, MAS, the monetary authority in Singapore, then took also a strong position on cyber and cyber resilience, and have set the bar extremely high. And a lot of the other governments and other regulators across the world have actually looked to the Bank of England and looked to MAS in Singapore to understand, again, what does good look like? And so they have taken a leading role. I think much more work still needs to be done in this space, but I think, again, we're off to a good start with the good work that's already been done globally. Any other comments or thoughts on what's been said so far? Okay, well, I'm conscious of time, so I'll switch gears.
Can I ask a question, please?
Please, please.
Sorry, yes. We read about this, that the SPI, I think, was able to recover part of the money that solar energy paid through Bitcoins. What are the developments there? I mean, is it going that Bitcoin or all the hijackers cannot be hidden anymore behind the Bitcoin anonymity?
So it's a fascinating question, Rovis, and I think that the FBI has done some fantastic work around attribution, so understanding, who the criminals were, and then yes, using advanced technical capabilities to understand where the transactions originated from, and then to your point, tracking down the flow of money. I've always been a great believer in trying to understand where the dollars or pounds or euros are flowing when we talk about criminal activity. Many years ago, when I was at one of the big four, I had the privilege of being part of a work group that was looking at terrorist money and terrorist payments as they flowed through the international banking system. And the project was looking at how those payments could be traced and how those payments could be locked down. And the thinking behind it was by locking down the payments and tracking the payments, we would be able to severely impact some of the terrorist activity. And it was relatively successful. And I think that the industry, the cyber industry, has not done a good enough job around thinking about the flows of money as it pertains to cyber crimes. And the sooner we begin to lock that down or make it difficult for cyber criminals to transfer money through the global and also cryptocurrency system, the more progress we will make. I think one of the challenges our friends at the FBI have, as many other law enforcement organizations have, unfortunately, is scalability. This is a massive problem. And despite all the resources they have in the deep pockets of the US government, we know that the world is still facing a significant challenge in terms of cyber skills. And that is true for both private sector and public sector. And so I think what we need to do moving forward is look at better private sector and public sector collaboration. But without a doubt, it was a fantastic development, and I think will help moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So if I can switch gears, and I know this is being quick and we're going into slightly different directions, which is fantastic, but I did want to touch on some of the benefits of cyber resiliency. And I think Jean touched on it earlier when he talked about the importance of trust and confidence. It's with the financial service clients that I work with, obviously trust and confidence is the bedrock of their businesses. And it is critical that they can be trusted and that consumers can be confident in them, in their systems, obviously when they transact and when they engage with the financial service organizations. I think it's clear that the industry for many years has been very focused on the availability of systems, the confidentiality of systems, but there hasn't been enough focused on the integrity of the data in a lot of those systems. So I am very optimistic that an increased focus on cyber resiliency from the regulators and from industry is not only going to improve the confidentiality and the availability of the systems, but also has the potential to focus also on the integrity of the data itself. And I think that will be very important. I was actually, as I said before, just on a call with the board, and what we were focusing on was a scenario whereby the integrity of the data in a financial trading system had been impacted by a piece of malicious software, which was linked to the situation in Russia, in the Ukraine. And that was a very difficult problem for them to deal with. It was a very difficult problem for them to restore from. And more importantly, it was a very difficult problem for them to communicate to the markets about, because they were struggling to understand if the integrity of the data and the integrity of the transactions was correct. And so I think that one of the main business benefits that I see is a better balance between confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and data. The final point that I'll touch on quickly is practical lessons learned and what organizations should be doing as they begin to think about this topic. And I think that the most important thing and the most successful thing that I've seen, again, at organizations that are quite mature, are tabletop exercises. And so maybe a question again for this team, just a yes or no. How many have you been directly involved in a tabletop exercise or a simulation exercise in the organizations that you work with or in the companies that you are part of? Just a yes or no. Have you participated in tabletop exercises or simulation exercises? So a couple of answers. And again, I think this is interesting because tabletop exercises are very useful when run correctly to be able to understand the far-reaching implications of a possible attack, a possible scenario. They build consensus at the top of the house around the severity and the complexities of a cyber attack, and they can flush out and indicate areas of weaknesses in the corporate governance which need to be addressed to begin to improve the cyber resiliency. So I guess my final and brief statement around cyber resiliency is, if there's one area where organizations should be considering making investments, it's not just around the identification and clarity around the ownership of a cyber resiliency program, but also the opportunity to think about tabletop exercises, potentially combined with deep technical exercises to bring together different stakeholders who can be and need to be part of the solution, identify potential areas of weaknesses, and then begin to map a roadmap out for the future to improve resilience and begin to increase your ability to bounce back, as I said earlier. So I know I've rushed through that fairly quickly, Angelos, but hopefully that's a quick summary that will stimulate some ideas and thoughts with regards to how things can be done differently through a more interactive process, such as a tabletop exercise, which will produce business benefits.
William, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We thank you.
No worries.
We need to go ahead with our last speaker. He's the chairman of Blue Voyant company, a leading global cybersecurity firm. This is Blue Voyant. And he is also senior advisor at McKinsey. He is Mr. Robert Hannigan. And the topic will be the changing cyber threat landscape and what the CEOs they need to know. Robert.
Thanks very much, Angelos, and good evening, everyone. Great to be with you. I'm going to completely change what I was going to say, because I have to say those were brilliant presentations from my colleagues. And I don't think I've ever been to an event where I've agreed with every word said. And I don't want to repeat what they have covered on the threat landscape and on risk and resilience. So I'm going to try to make a few remarks, or drawing into three areas, and then we might have time, I guess, for some discussion. And I won't do slides for that reason. I'll just try to give you some thoughts. And as you said, I've been in private sector now for 4 or 5 years with many enterprise clients and also medium-sized business clients on the managed security service side. Before that, 20 years in the UK government, and I run our GCHQ, our Signals Intelligence Agency and Cyber Agency. So I've seen the government side of this as well, and some of the regulation that was in preparation now being rolled out. So just let me say three things, and I'm going to end by some reasons to be cheerful, because like Jean, I'm an optimist. I think things will get better eventually. But I wanted to cover a couple of points about the board, something about current threats, and then reasons to be cheerful. So on the board, I think the title you gave this afternoon, Angelos, was a great idea, to say cybersecurity and member of the board. When I first went to boards in government around 10, 15 years ago now, people listened politely. They didn't really understand. I think they thought we were slightly crazy. And they said, well, that's the IT department's problem, and they've got it covered. And that has changed radically. So one reason to be cheerful is that boards now get it. It's partly because of the events that Panos and others set out, but they do get it. And I think the big message was then, and still is, to try to get boards to treat cyber risk in the way they treat other risks, and to integrate that into their business risk processes. And I see that more and more happening in boards, not everywhere, but it is happening. And I think that's a reason to be really encouraged, because if I look back to 10, 15 years ago, we published a document in the UK called 10 Steps to Cybersecurity for Companies. 10 things they needed to think about, 10 areas, if they wanted to get good. And we reckoned that if they implemented these, they could prevent 80% of the attacks against them. There would still be the ones that got through and the nation state and sophisticated stuff, but they could actually get off that baseline and really protect themselves well. And it was republished last year and nothing really had changed. So one of the big takeaways, which I think Harry and Panos's presentation showed, is that for many, many companies, they're still not getting the basics right. The truth is, many of the attacks described this afternoon have got through because of things like poor IT hygiene, so failure to patch, poor access management, passwords, multi-factor authentication, all the stuff we've been talking about for years, poor configuration, poor culture, poor human behavior. So we still have a big job to do to get off the bases, I reckon, on cybersecurity. But I'm optimistic that we will get there through a mixture of private sector focus and government regulation, which is beginning to set those minimum standards, including in Europe. And I think ENISA, for example, is doing great work. UK NCSC has done great work. So we will get there, and there will be some fundamental regulation around things like IoT security, so-called secure by design, making devices and software more secure in the first place, better software development security. These sorts of things have a long lead time, but they are going to raise the baseline along with better behaviors. I could talk a lot about the board because I spent a lot of time with them, most recently with boards who are suffering ransomware attacks, which is a really interesting experience. And I think for those who haven't done the kind of tabletop exercises that William talked about, a really difficult, disorientating experience. But we might talk about that. So let me move to the second couple of remarks on current threats. So what am I most worrying about? Well, of course, ransomware continues. And I thought Panos covered it brilliantly. The couple of things I've noticed which are predictable, and it goes to your point, Angelos, about the creativity of these criminal groups, is that they are targeting sectors they didn't target 5 years ago. So healthcare, for example, because there's a lot of money there and they can't afford to have business interrupted during a pandemic. So these groups have realized these are the companies to go for. The other big shift, I think, is towards industrial control. So going from manufacturing, realizing that targeting industrial control systems means you can really get a company where it hurts through paralyzing its manufacturing. We saw that with some big auto manufacturers like Honda last year. So there are some changes, but it's here to stay, I think, and I'm really interested in the Bitcoin debate and the payment debate, which we might come back to. But the one I wanted to spend a minute on really was supply chain. The reason why I'm worried about Ukraine, as William said, is that it was the place where supply chain attacks were first kind of experimented with. And Panos mentioned the NotPetya, which was, again, a fake ransomware. And the collateral damage of that we all saw. Maersk paralyzed as a shipping worldwide, $300 million loss. Many other companies across Europe paralyzed, really, as collateral damage in a war, if you like, between Russia and Ukraine. What will be different this time is that there may be targeted attacks against the West. If there are sanctions, for example, against financial services in Russia, we would expect retaliation in similar ways. And the worrying thing is that with supply chain, the longer you are embedded in somebody's networks, the more damage you can do. And Russia, certainly in the case of Ukraine, has a head start. They've been in there for a long, long time. And many Western companies are only now beginning to think about securing their supply chain. We've all been worrying about our own networks. We're trying to make them better. We think we're doing really well in our company. And we are reckoning that probably 70% plus of the attacks that are coming to us are coming through our supply chain for the reasons people have already discussed, which is it's a soft way in. The accountancy company in Ukraine, MEDOC, which had annual updates of its software package rolled out to, I think, 1 million 1 million machines across Ukraine every year, regulated, ironically, I think, to do that. It had to be used. But that was a company which was small, didn't have an IT department. Its service hadn't been patched for years. So this was a soft way in to a mass of customers. And that's the basic model of a supply chain attack. So to touch on the great risk presentation and tie those two together, cyber risk is a bit different because it's very dynamic. It's not like health and safety risk even, or financial risk, all the other things boards are used to, because your networks are changing, the cyber attackers are changing, vulnerabilities are being published or discovered all the time. The whole ecosystem is changing and is very dynamic. So our approach to supply chain risk has been very static. We've done compliance. We've sent people questionnaires and said, are you okay on security? And of course, they write back and say, yes, we're fine. And it's been very compliance based. So do you have a patching policy? Everybody has a patching policy. What matters is, are you actually implementing it? Have you done something about it? So it's very practical cyber risk and very technical. And then I think the tiering of it is different. So how do you say, what are your top cyber risks? The NotPetya attack is again a great example. If you ask a company, what are your top 10 vendors, supply chain companies, they'll tell you the top 10 that they're spending the most money on. And they're probably some of the world's biggest companies like Google. Well, you're not going to improve their security realistically. You might improve your connection to them, but you're not going to make them better. The risk may come from somebody in tier 55 of your risk register, some small company you've never heard of that is connected to you or has access to you or has your data. So it is the scale of supply chain and the complexity makes this a real challenge, and it's something that governments are worrying about a lot, putting a lot of effort into, and we work for some of those governments in Blue-Voyant, but a lot of big enterprises as well, to try to look at that ecosystem in real time, to monitor it in the way that you would monitor your own network internally in a normal way. So I think that is one to watch, and we've already talked a little bit, I think Panos touched on Log4j and some of the way that open source software is really out of control. We just don't know about the security. That has to be for governments, but it's going to take a long time. So plenty to watch there. And then just one other third point, and that which we haven't had time to talk about, and that is skills. I think, you know, the theme running through all of this for me is this chronic shortage of skills in the government and in the private sector. It's very difficult, even for the best funded companies in the world, to buy the right talent. And that's where boards' problems come from, because they don't always know the right questions to ask. And even when they ask them, they don't understand the answer. So skills is a chronic problem. It's not going to be solved quickly. There are lots of efforts to increase that pipeline. But I think the big responsibility of any CEO is to look at the skills they've got and what they want to develop and really get that right. But a big part of the answer has to be automation and outsourcing. In reality, I'm seeing more and more large, medium to large enterprises, even some of the biggest companies in the world, going for managed options for security and using the cloud services that are coming from all of the big providers now. So Microsoft, Splunk, AWS, I think Google will get there. There's a logic to this. You know, they have the resources, they have the data. You don't have to do everything through them, but there is huge potential for cloud to make our security better, actually. And you know, there are some downsides and things we should worry about. But in short, I think one of my first reasons to be cheerful is that cloud will make our overall security better in the long run. So finally, the other couple of reasons to be cheerful. The other, I think, is the raising of the baseline by governments and by industry. That is happening. We have a lot of people on this. The industry is developing some great solutions, and I think we will gradually get there. We won't get there in time to prevent every attack, and that's why, as William says, resilience is so important. It's why not just prevention and detection, but actually knowing what to do after the attack and how to survive it is still critical to the boards, as it was 10 years ago. But I am an optimist, and I think there is plenty that I mean, the quality of this conversation we would not have had 15 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago, I think. So we have come a long way, but there's a lot more to do, and the attackers are moving fast. So I'll stop there, Angelos, and be really interested to hear people's views.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert. As I see, we need to be totally transformed.
Well, I think the transformation is happening. But yes, from the position.
I mean, in order to face the risk, to face the threat.
Yeah, I think those boards that haven't already transformed need to. And I agree with some of the points made by George and Jean about culture change and leadership from the top. You know, this has to be taken seriously by the CEO, otherwise it's not going to work.
And Robert, if I may just make a quick comment on the talent piece, you know, I fully agree with you. I mean, depending on who you speak to, there's claims that we're facing a shortage of about 3 to 3.5 million cybersecurity professionals across the globe. However, I personally believe we're kind of casting our net too narrow, because we need to involve communication experts and mathematicians and behavioral psychologists and actuaries. This isn't just about technology. And so I think when you start to think about it that way, I become a little more optimistic, which gives me hope. But, you know, with my clients, I mean, just this week, I've had a request from a large financial service organization that said, give me as many GCP cloud security engineers as you can find. Another RFP for 226 cybersecurity experts. Where are we going to find those people? We hired 50,000 people last quarter in Accenture, but they're not all security. And so I think we have to be much more creative around developing talent. And as you said, it's going to be a long runway.
Yeah.
William, if I can add just surely to that, I think the addition to talent should not be left just to the cybersecurity, but also to the diversity on the boards.
I agree.
One of the elements, you know, right now we're using practices and models and an individual based on business experience and how many years they had in an industry, in a particular industry. But the world is changing, the environment is changing, the risk environment is changing. That's where you also need to bring new qualities, new identities in, and boards should seriously think about that.
I completely agree. And it can be a shock for boards to say, actually, you need that 23-year-old over there to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Robert, may I ask you something regarding from your government experience and the government regulation? So do you think that it's better for government to go to more prescriptive regulation or to leave it to an outcome-oriented one?
So it's a great question, I think, Panos. We in the UK, we've spent years going for the non-prescriptive, so outcome-based, because we felt that prescriptive was out of date too quickly. It tended to stifle, it led to the wrong behaviors. I think there's been pushback from industry, particularly around the NIS directive and critical national infrastructure, saying, no, we need more guidance, we need more specificity. So work with us as a sector to say what's right for this sector. And so we've had some very specific guidance around telecoms, for example, but it's a lot of work and soaks up a lot of talent. So my kind of half answer, I guess, is you've got to get a balance between the two. If you go for very prescriptive in the way that some other regulators do their sectors, you're going to be out of date immediate and you're going to paralyze companies. So outcome is still important, but
AKA PCI, you remember? Yeah, I mean, it was a nice, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As I see, we don't have any question till now. I remind once again to our attendants if they have to put any question. By the way, and in order not to forget it, as I noticed, a lot of topics like risk, skills, training, culture. From our side, from ICBS side, we have already organized a very special offer to all the members of EASA. It will be a seminar regarding the cybersecurity, and all our members will be officially informed from EASA. It is the minimum that we could do, except this event, of course. As I see, we don't have any question, and we could close, gentlemen. I would like to thank you very much for the excellent information that you transferred to us. I think that we are a little bit more prepared, let's say, to face all these challenges and the risks. And I hope that at the end, to this battle between good and bad, the good will win at the end, and the technology of cyber resiliency. Thank you very much. And
Let's
bye-bye.
go. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have
Bye.
a nice evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.